It's Tuesday morning and I'm back at it. Sunday I did my storytelling, and yesterday I took the day off to do more fun things like a root canal, which wasn't near first one I ever had done, which wasn't bad at all. It was sure a lot better than the pain I was going through. Anyway, today I want to connect the rod to the crank. You can see there's some pitting on the crank. Some of you might be shuddering about it, but three things. I've read about people having cranks welded up and reground, and that's just not in my budget, because as the one guy said, it makes you want to hide the receipts from your wife. Secondly, the time. I'm going to be 67 years old and I want to get this thing running someday. And third, I don't think it's going to be an issue. I'm not going to run it hard. It isn't like it's going for production. And when I first get it running, I will definitely be taking the covers off and checking the bearings on a regular basis at first right away. So now I'm going to see about getting the piston connected to the rod connected to the crank. Now the ring pressure holds the piston in place. So I'm going to turn the crank up some and then try pulling the piston down to it. I'm going to put this over the journal to protect it until I get the rod right down next to being in place. Let's see if this will go. Oh, man, does that slide nice. I can take that out already. There. That's down on the rod. Now, the next step will be to get the cap and some plastic gauge in order to check the clearance. Well, I took a break, went in the house to eat breakfast, and I thought I would view the first clip I took for this video. And I apologize about the yellow end of my trouble light being in the way. I couldn't see much. But while I was watching the video, I moved the light. I noticed that, the number 4. And that belongs on the other side. Here, the second time I put the piston in, I put it in the wrong way around. So now I'm going to have to spin that around, but it shouldn't be a big deal. I should be able to take it off the crank and just spin the rod and piston in the bore, because the rings will stay in place. So I'm going to go about that now. First, just turn the crank away from it. Now I'm inspecting my wear marks on the crank. You can see that, and that corresponds with a wear mark in my connecting rod bearing. So that's why I know the rod goes the other way around. I want to reach in there and attempt to spin that piston and rod around. I'm going to push it up some if I can. Now, give it half a spin. There. Now it's the way it belongs. And I'm going to bring the crank up to it farther. I'll apologize again. Of course, you can only get the camera and hands and everything and so many things in one place. You couldn't see me spin it around, but you might be able to see there's no number there now, so I spun it halfway around. Now I'm going to move the crank up towards the rod. There. Now I got the rod down on the crank again. Now I'm going to take you down in the basement on to show you a few other things I noticed about the connecting rods before I go any farther. As I've said many times, this is a collection of mismatched parts. Now what you're looking at now is the cap for rod number 4, which I'm in the process of putting in. You can see on that cap there's these grooves here. I don't know what purpose they serve. And the big main shim has grooves to match. Now if you look at the cap from rod number 2, there aren't any grooves along the edge there, like rod number 4. And also the shims are different. There's no grooves in the shims. There's 2 protruding ends here in the center is relieved. Or on the shims for number 4, that big main one has the grooves that match the grooves in the cap, and the shims fit behind this collar, or I don't know if you call it a collar, this step in the shim to keep them in alignment. And another difference is on rods number 1 and number 4, you see they have that big flat boss on the side where the rod bolt goes through. And that's where the numbers, someone stamped the numbers in. But if you look at rod number 1, or this is rod number 2, but number 1's the same, there is no boss on them like that. So, as I said before, this is a collection of mismatched parts. Oh, and also, if you look at, let's see, that was rod number 2. If you look at the cap for rod number 1, it has a type of cap without those notches in it, but it has the type of shims with the notches in the main shim and in the shims that fit behind the shoulder. So, like I say, it's a collection of mismatched parts. First, I'm going to be putting it in with all the shims just as it came out to check the clearance at that. Like I say, I've been told on good authority that you should have a clearance of 4 to 6. Well, I want to make it 4, a tight 4, in case there's, because of the pitting on the crank, and I don't want the rods to start to hammer and mushroom the babbitt out. So I want to make sure the rods are really good and snug, but not too snug. I'm not gonna. I just want to get them right at 4 if I can. First we're going to put them in with the shims the way they are to see what clearance they were at. Back at shimming number 4. Now I've laid a piece of plastic gauge in there that has a range from 2 to 6. And I'm going to carefully install that cap, keeping the shims in place, and then tighten it down. Well, I'm not even going to try to video that because my hands will just be in the way and you won't be able to see any of it anyway. Well, that was easier to get in there than I thought. I should never get overconfident though. You know what happened the other day putting that back cover on and I dropped the bolt. I didn't show you off camera how long it took me to find it. Now we gotta make sure the shims are lined up good. I have to get around on the other side and check the other side. Now I have to get a wrench and tighten them down. Some of you may have read in old service manuals. Draw it up tight. That's just what I'm doing. I go back to the other side. Of course, I probably can't draw it up as tight as I could 30 years ago. Now I let it sit for a while with all those shims in there, and try drawing it up one more time before I take it off to check the plastic gauge. Yeah, in old service manuals, they talked about drawing it up tight. Then they talk about the torque reading. And now, on modern day engines, I guess they talk about rod bolt stretch, or bolt stretch for how much tension should be on it. I've worked on my fair of old machinery through my life, and I think I'm going to go with the draw it up tight on this. I disassembled it, knew about how tight how they felt when I took them off. And I'm going to go on the theory of draw it up tight like they did years ago. I was just outside putting wood in my wood burner a little bit ago in the snow out there. And I was just thinking about, I've seen videos of them logging in the 20s and 30s with 60 crawlers in the mountains through the snow and in the spring through the mud. And I was just thinking about the guy who maintained those tractors at that time. You know, there had to be times when they would develop a knock and some guy out in the woods in the cold in way rougher conditions than I deal with, taking this apart, taking shims out. You just imagine what those people went through. Of course, I guess it was better. It's kind of like running old excavators. It was better than a shovel, and I guess having a caterpillar to fix was better than using horses to move it all. Or mules or oxen. So, oh man, I'm going to show you this. Look at this. We are definitely taking some shims out here, because it didn't even hardly touch the plastic gauge. In the center, it didn't touch it. Oh, barely. So it's probably got 6+ thousandths. So I'll be taking some out of here. And if you look at the Babbitt, the other ones don't look as bad. If you look at the Babbitt on this one, it maybe was starting to knock and mushroom it a little bit, because it's mushroomed up into the edges here a little. So this one we got to get snugged down a lot more than what it is. I'll show you when I get to it again. Get that far. So you can see here it's a little narrower than the 3. It's actually staying a little bit to the right, so some of the plastic gauge must have stuck to the crank. So it's a little narrower than the 3, but it's a little wider than the 4, so it's a good tight 4 thousandths clearance. And the man said 4 to 6, so that's what I'm going to let it at. And like I say, I'll be checking these after it's run right away. I'll probably put a dial indicator on them and a pry and try prying up and down on them at that point. So this one's going to go back on